Hello, and welcome to Reed Scholars Live. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Fleming, current president of Reed Scholars. Today, I am super excited to have with me Lisa Lewis, who's an MPH and has been spending her career in clinical trials and lots of other things that we're going to talk about during the course of this podcast. So, hello, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Dr. Fleming. It's so great to be with you today.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you and to talk a little bit about clinical trials. We talk about health equity in clinical trials. That's a huge topic and often a under discussed topic. Um, but before we get there, I really just interested in figuring out how you got there. So when we think about going into the research realm, again, also under discussed topic, we talk a lot about, especially Black and Brown women going into STEM and having that type of support. So tell us a little bit about how you got started and what interested you in research in general. Let's start there and then we'll go through the rest.
Thank you. It's been an interesting journey. So I started my career 25 years ago in the pediatric hematology oncology research lab at a large academic medical center in New York City, where I was born and raised. Undergraduate biology, pre-medicine, decided not to apply to medical school. I was 20 years old, trying to figure out what my next step would be. My mom was a registered nurse at that same academic medical center, knew that I did science, and she had some colleagues who had a laboratory. She didn't know exactly what they did in there, but she knew they did science.
My daughter needs something to do.
Exactly. She knew they did something with biology in there, and she knew that's what I studied. So she went to one of her colleagues and said, hey, my daughter just graduated. She's, biology. She's looking for a role. Do you have anything in your lab? And fate would so have it that the research technologist at the time was either moving on to a PhD program or medical school. So I went in, I interviewed, and the rest is history.
Wow, that is
Um,
serendipity at its best, right?
it really was. And it even got more serendipitous when, a year later, again, this was a pediatric hemonc lab. They did cancer research, and a year later, she was actually diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer. And we lost her a couple of years later, but the value in the career journey that I've had, I can always look back and say that the work that I've been a part of throughout the years, both in academia and the pharmaceutical industry, I've had the honor of playing a teeny tiny role in bringing some of the best cancer treatments to market. And some of those treatments have helped folks like my mom. So I have her to thank for my career.
Oh my goodness. So thank you for sharing that story. I know that's tough and it's beautiful also in finding the silver lining is not the right word, but there's something beautiful in every story. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that with us. Um, and you also mentioned, your 25-year-old career and kind of where you started is not where you are now, right? So you've taken the scenic route, and
Oh, yeah.
I am a person who knows about not taking the straight road. Even when
Okay, so
people,
you can relate.
yes, people are like, is that sure? Is that really what you want to do? I was like, absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
but tell us a
It,
little bit about the windy road.
it's definitely been a windy road. And career journeys are not a straight line. And I know that now. I don't think I knew that early on when I was, making lefts and rights and all kind of different turns. But I did that bench research in pediatric hematology oncology for about 4 years and then decided I wanted to go the public health route. So I started taking course towards my Master of Public Health and then moved over to a role at the New York Academy of Medicine. Completely different, moving
Hmm.
from hard science to qualitative research, and work with a team there that was working on some HRSA-funded programs to help folks adhere to highly active antiretroviral therapies. It was a national program. They had sites in Brooklyn, New York, Multnomah, Washington, California, all over the country, and they sent their data into the group that I work with, and I worked as a data manager and research associate with some really awesome folks there while I was starting my studies in public health. All the while, I kind of had my sights on the more clinical side of things. So even though I took that role and got some good grounding in public health, I always kind of had a long-term goal of getting back to something related to direct care or research involving like people and patients, like in a real direct way. So I decided to pursue a career in clinical trials and landed a role as a study coordinator. Interestingly, back at the same academic medical center where I started my career with a new group, you know how those things happen. It was some really great experience working on cooperative group studies and data management and specimen procurement and all of that. So that was some really great experience. And then after that, I moved over to an adult oncology research manager role where I was kind of the one-stop shop, the study coordinator, the data manager. I was in the room with the physicians when they were, consenting patients and arm in arm, and the infusion room was like right outside of my office. So it was some really rewarding experience, working directly with cancer patients in that way. And that was also my first exposure to pharmaceutical industry sponsored studies. So folks from, different sponsors would come in and I would meet with them. And that kind of sparked my interest to move into industry. And in 2007, I landed at Novartis Oncology and made my way, up and across in terms of career growth. Again, spending most of my time because, that's what my passion was, that's what my experience was. So I spent most of my time in oncology, working on oncology clinical research, arm in arm with physicians like yourself, figuring things out, writing protocols, making sure that safety was, at the forefront for the teams and all of that. So that's some really great experience. I did that in various different companies, moved over to the medical affairs side, which is a little different. You're kind of getting ready for bringing drugs to market. So the conversations are both, they're a little bit broader in terms of making sure that, clinicians, physicians, nurses, pharmacists understand the mechanism of action for a new drug and all that. So that was some really interesting experience. So I did that through 2015. And then decided to strike out on my own as a free agent, if you will.
I love it.
As an independent consultant. So I started that in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, doing the same type of work that I had done before, but, as an independent contractor. So I could kind of have a little bit more flexibility. So I was able to contribute to some really great work at additional companies in that way, but all the while thinking that I was grateful for my journey to that point. I was excited about all the work that I did with all these amazingly brilliant people across the industry. But I wanted to do work that impacted more than just one drug, more than just one disease area, but something more broad, right?
Yeah.
So keeping my eyes open, which I hope we can get to because it's something that I've always done. I saw a role for diversity, a director of diversity in clinical trials at a major pharmaceutical company. And I threw my hat in the ring. They needed someone that had a depth of experience in oncology because that was a focus for the work. And the team took a chance on me. And I spent 2 years in that role up until October of this year. That was definitely a different environment for me, but not so much because obviously as a Black woman, having navigated, the healthcare space many times over, I've seen the best and worst of what can happen when folks think about health equity as a fundamental human right for everybody. I've seen the best and worst of what can happen when people think about diversity in a real intentional way. That adult oncology site that I landed in that I mentioned, they knew how to do it. It wasn't rocket science.
Yeah.
They had physicians, nurses, pharmacists, allied health staff that reflected the community, that spoke the languages of the people that were walking in the door. They had me as their study coordinator, a familiar face to many people. It wasn't hard at all. We enrolled many patients of color in clinical trials at that site. When you're intentional, it's not hard.
Intentionality is everything. One thing we also share, I started my new journey. I think I'm on another new journey too by now, but in 2015, And so that's when I left full-time clinical practice right outside of Philadelphia to do travel medicine, um, and became nomadic. And so
Mm,
that was a bold step at the time,
yes.
but it's not as uncommon now. But before we dive deeper, because of course, we're going to spend some more time talking about your recent work for our audience. Do a little definitions for us. So when we think about clinical trials,
Yeah.
well, even when we think about clinical research, let's go back there. Clinical research is that's a broad thing. So we have bench research, we have people who are in the lab who are very rarely patient facing, who are
Mhm.
very upstream to the process. And then, as you mentioned, there are people who are in clinical research that are seeing patients in the hospital and enrolling people in studies, are very, very, very patient facing. So
Mhm.
just give us a little bit of definition on what both of those worlds are, and even the in between.
Sure, absolutely. I've had the privilege of sitting in both of those worlds, both of those sides of the fence. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Clinical research, bench research, you'll hear the term preclinical research. That's, when you see people in lab coats with microscopes on TV, that's what that is. Right. So you're in a setting where you're not, like you said, not directly patient facing, but you're doing the science to be able to understand the disease state, to be able to eventually make change in that disease area, whether it be refining the treatments that are out there, developing new drugs, developing new ways to use existing drugs. That's that part of clinical research. And then to your point, on the other end of the spectrum, when we hear clinical trials, that's when you're dealing directly with people, study participants, people who in some cases may be healthy and just want to help researchers to learn more about a drug that's going to hopefully be approved, or in many cases, people that have the active disease, whether we're talking about cancer or heart disease, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, etc. Those are the studies where you try to figure out what the right doses are of a drug, to make sure a drug is safe, to test it in different populations, and then to see hopefully if it works for the disease state that you're trying to study it on. And I think the horrible calamity that was the COVID-19 pandemic, if there's one lesson or some sort of bright side to all the terrible things that happened, it brought clinical trials to kitchen table conversation. And folks like you and I were sitting at home thinking, we're talking about this now in a real way. Obviously, it was under horrible conditions and things were accelerated and all of that, but it brought those conversations about clinical trials and also conversations about public health to everyone's kitchen table. And those of us who've been studying those things for years, it was interesting to see that play out.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for also underscoring, what you're studying in these trials can be different. So it can be disease focused, it can be drug focused, it can be intervention focused. And sometimes it's in the preventative, like it's ongoing research about diseases that we've known about and trying to get better. That could be about a new drug, making sure comparing a new drug to an old drug and its efficacy or how well it works. Or it can be in response to
Yeah.
something that happens like a pandemic and trying to figure out how to make a real time solution and see what works on an accelerated pathway. So all of that can happen. And then, kind of to your second point, earlier when you were talking about transitioning into the DEI space of clinical trials. And so historically speaking, I think we know a few things to be true. One is in a lot of clinical trials, the number of diverse participants is pretty low. And so, and that can be from a few different reasons. And then we also know that there's the historical aspect where there were clinical trials done on people unbeknownst to them,
Mhm.
and how that has somewhat, still, even though I mean, it hasn't been that long, but it's been a little bit of time. That still has damaged the trust of the system. And so, but we need diverse trials so that we can make sure that we're designing interventions and solutions that are going to be, the most beneficial and most successful for the most part of the population.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about, you talked a little bit about your lived experience in that space, but fill in a little bit more of the historical context about why populations either aren't recruited or apprehensive about joining trials. And why do people lean away from intentionality instead of into it, as you mentioned before?
So that last part, that's interesting to discuss.
Yeah.
um, yeah, start with the history. Unfortunately, we're all, well, not all, but many people are aware of, the atrocities, and we have to call it what it is, right? Call a thing, like people say. The atrocities that have occurred in the name of clinical research. We know about the syphilis study that occurred at Tuskegee University. We know about various reproductive health studies that were done in Puerto Rico. We know about various studies that were done for American Indian, Native American populations in North America, and the list goes on and on. People were not aware, they were not properly consented. Bad things happened, right? We have to acknowledge that. And I always say we have to illuminate to eliminate. We can't ignore the past. People in general, especially people that look like you and I, have a justifiable distrust and mistrust because of the past. However, the thing that I always say, and I have said, in my prior work in this space, is that we know what has happened in the past. What's happening right now?
Yes.
And the sad reality is that there are inequities that are happening right now. Now, thankfully, we have rules in place and regulations, federal regulations in place to govern how we do clinical trials, thankfully, as a result of many of those things that happened that I just mentioned, even prior to that, in the 40s, the horrible things that happened in Europe, et cetera.
Right.
So thankfully, we have rules in place to protect folks. Unfortunately, where we are now today in 2023 is that with those rules in place, with research ongoing, with breakthroughs happening in everything from how we treat heart disease to obesity, what we're seeing now, to cancer, the problem now is that people are not being asked to participate. They're not made aware of the research that's happening that could potentially impact the disease that they have. And that is almost as egregious, right? Because if you have, I can speak specifically to the cancer research area. Just 5-10 years ago, there were drugs that did not exist. Just 5-10-20 years ago, there were types of cancer that were, a terminal diagnosis that are now chronic. You can live a long time because of the amazing treatments that are on the market. So the stakes are high. So if you have a cancer diagnosis and you're in a clinic and the people who are conducting the research, for whatever reason, decide that that person won't be interested. Mary Fleming, she's not going to be interested because, prior injustices, she may not adhere, she may have family commitments, all of these assumptions that are made about various people are preventing them from potentially having access to treatments that could potentially extend their life or improve the quality of their life, or in some cases, quote unquote, cure their disease. It's public knowledge. He's someone that we've seen in the media, et cetera. There's a gentleman named Mel Mann. He's one of I believe the longest living survivors of a specific type of leukemia, treated with a drug by one of the pharmaceutical companies that I worked for in my career. And if the researchers had decided that because he was a Black man, African-American man, that we're not even going to ask him, where would he be today?
Yeah.
It's been more than 25 years. And now he speaks all over the world about clinical trials and research, and he's using his platform. But if the researchers had made assumptions about him based on what he looked like, he would not have had that chance. That's what we mean when we talk about diversity in clinical trials. It's not charity. It's good science. It's good healthcare.
You've had a lot of pearls. I like illumination to illuminate. And it's not charity, it's science. These are good. And going one step further into that, so I know another thing that you are really interested is connecting the person to the science. So tell us a little bit more, because that is an excellent example of personifying the journey and not just talking about the disease process or the drug intervention. So just speak a little
Yeah,
bit more about that.
absolutely. I think, and this is my opinion, I think sometimes in life sciences research, researchers can sometimes lose sight of the person behind the data, the person behind that data point that you're collecting to advance science, which is important, right? Data is important. My master of public health was in health informatics, so I'm a data girl, right? That's important.
Like the numbers.
But but there are people behind what we're trying to achieve in terms of curing disease and making diseases more, livable and improving people's quality of life. Um, Even how the language that we use in
Yeah,
research, at one point, people would say research subjects.
yeah,
Now we say research participants. So you're talking about a person, not an object,
yeah.
and someone who has an active role in the research that's being conducted with them involved. I'm also studying bioethics, and in my class yesterday, um, I mentioned how, in the cancer research space, sometimes we use words or phrases like treatment failure. The patient failed treatment, or they lost their battle with cancer.
Mm.
Those words matter. And you really have to think about the person, the family, the caregivers, the people who love them when you're trying to conduct research to help, save and extend their lives. So that's something I'm really passionate about, really, because I've been on a couple of different sides of the fence. I've been that researcher. I've been, that clinical trialist working with physicians, but I've also been a daughter of a cancer patient. I've been the daughter-in-law of an Alzheimer's patient. I'm the daughter of a prostate cancer survivor. I'm the wife of a prostate cancer survivor. So I've been in all those different conversations, and I see the need to make sure that we have a person-centered approach to what we're trying to do.
Love that. I think, um, bringing it back to it's not just the diversity of background that brings your expertise to the table, but a diversity of experience and being able to bring all of that with you everywhere that you go just makes it so much more impactful for the people that you interact with.
Thank you.
So we're going to close. I'm not going to keep you too much longer, but I did want to take another step from that conversation and kind of going back to where we started in talking about STEM and especially about Black and Brown girls and women entering the field. Talk to me a little bit about mentorship and what that means to you.
Oh, that is huge. Um, Even if we bring it back to the research realm, there have been documented studies that have said if someone walks into a research site and they see people that look like them, they will be more comfortable and they'll be more interested in hearing more about the research that's going on that could potentially involve them. And that goes across race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, language, all of the things that make people who they are. When people are comfortable and they see people that look like them, sound like them, have a similar culture, or can understand their lived experience, that makes a difference, especially at a time when people are stressed out. When you have a diagnosis, it's a stressful time. So you want someone who understands you, your life, your family life, your culture, where you're coming from, your history, all of that. So that's definitely very important. So that's why we need to, continue that conversation about diversifying life sciences in general. And that's runs the gamut from the people who are doing the research with the cells, like I did back in the late 90s, to the people who are treating patients, to the people who are capturing the data. AI is all the rage, right? But my thought, bias in, bias out, right? So people who are doing the coding and programming and all of that to launch AI, they need to also have the lived experiences of the folks who are going to be impacted. We've seen that. There are brilliant folks who don't work in the space to say that AI, there are biases that are built in there, but it's built by people. So diversity is super important from the whole spectrum of the life sciences space and STEM in general.
Yeah, and going back to your word from before, intentionality, and being very intentional through the whole process and through your hires, through your marketing campaigns, through your vocabulary and the words that you use, I think is where we need to go back to, and starting from that place, right? So a lot of times we try to build diversity, equity, and inclusion in on the back end, as opposed to starting with it and making sure that it is embedded in each of those lanes to begin with. And then and not only is it intentional, but it also is then genuine, right? Like it feels a different way to the patients who are coming to interact. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Yes.
that's really good. Um, and as we close, I usually close with a question about what are you looking forward to, or what would be your pearl of wisdom for those entering the space. And so, your space, you've got like 5 spaces, so you can pick one of those, or talk about what you're optimistic for. I mean, I think we've gone through so much as a people,
Yeah.
globally in the past couple of years, and trying to figure out what everybody's next best step is. So what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I'll start with the optimism. I'm hopeful. One of the highlights of my role in diversity in clinical trials, the role that I just left, was my interaction with the interns,
Hmm.
folks that are just starting out in their career, undergrads, new grads, early grad students. They're really bright and they're eager and they get it. And I'm excited about that. I'm also excited about internship programs in industry, academia, et cetera, where they have access to things I didn't have access to when I first, graduated from undergrad. So I'm hopeful and excited about what I've seen in some of the young people. I love to talk to younger people. I was in a career advisor a session with the Dana-Farber program that they have there, the DFCC Cure program, and just sharing what I shared with you, my career journey, and I'm excited and optimistic about the next generation of folks that will be impacting biomedical research. I'm excited about it. Um, what I would say in terms of like a lesson learned, and that this windy path that I've had, is 2 things. Bet on yourself. Take risks. Calculated risks, but take risks. Bet on yourself. That's what I've done. Um, learned a lot along the way, but definitely bet on yourself. And then the second thing that I would say is be honest
Hmm.
about what you actually want. One of the amazing things, and I connected with you, Dr. Fleming, through the health equity program at Chan, and that was an amazing week of my life. And one of the great lessons, one of many great lessons, was from Dr. Reede herself. She talked about thinking about your what.
Hmm.
And the fact that someone like her would take the time to impart on us, all the professionals on that call, on that session, in that class, the importance of your journey and really being honest and clear about your what is something that stuck with me. And it's definitely something that I hold close as I think through this next phase of my career. Be honest, and be honest about your what. Be honest about what you want. Be honest about what your strengths are. I'm 25 years in. I know what I'm good at. I'm honest about what I'm not good at. And I'm honest about the things that I want to put aside. And I'm honest about the things that I may not be good at, but I want to improve upon. You have to be honest. I think for me, earlier in my career, I kind of did what I thought I was supposed to do instead of leaning into my strengths. So I think that's something really important at any point in your career, to be honest with yourself and lean into your strengths.
Yeah, those are really good. I think I was just actually talking to somebody yesterday, and I was like, before you go down this path, know where your North Star is, because
Right.
it is easy to become complacent. It is easy to let others push you. It is easy to settle into what you're supposed to do or what you've been told to do and not actually what you want to do. And, that's one, it's not maximizing your gifts, but also that it's going to lead you to be unhappy and lead to burnout. And so
Right.
I also encourage people who, if they are in that, and I'll say this too. Some people are linear path people, and that's where they're supposed to be, and that's okay. Like, we're not
Right.
discounting the linear path people, but for
Right.
those of us who have done the windy road, seek us out and talk through the process. And we talked a little bit about mentorship here, but it's important. We are out here. There are those of us who have this diversity of experience and are happy to share. So I'm glad that you said that, and definitely want to encourage those to not feel stuck if anybody does feel stuck in the situation that they're in now.
Right. Right.
So with that, I will thank you so much for your time in this conversation. Like I said, I enjoyed all of your pearls of wisdom that you dropped throughout our conversation today. I really love learning more about what you have done and how you crafted your career. And like you said, kept your eyes open so that you could respond to serendipity when it was presented to you. And I look forward to seeing what you do next, because it's clearly going to be something great and awesome.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for the time today. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Reed Scholars Live. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel.